Hey everyone, this is BrettFish Anderson from Out of the Fishbowl. Welcome back to this bonus series of 30 ideas for white people asking, but what can I do when it comes to race and anti-racism? Let's dive right on in. So this is the second part of the series of practical tips of how can I work out my anti-racism. And as I shared in the first episode and in the Amazing Race episode, which kind of introduced us to the series, this is very likely going to be a journey that I, BrettFish Anderson, am going to be on for the rest of my life. And likely you are as well. And so a friend of mine, Solofelo in Joburg, was asked this question: why must I still pay for the sins of my grandparents? And that was asked by a white person. And her response was, because I am still paying for the sins of your grandparents. And I think that's a really good kind of entry point in as we build on the 10 tips that we looked at in the first episode. And we are going to dive right in. We're going to try get through these things. And I'm going to ask you, some of the ones that we look at today are going to require a little bit more of you. Some of them might feel prickly. They might bring about some defensiveness. Remember just to lean in and to listen. And also, not necessarily all 30 tips are going to be relevant for everyone that's listening. Maybe you hear the 30 and maybe they're just 6 that you need to hear. A lot of these are just about being really good, decent people to those people around us. And so you might do a bunch of this stuff naturally already. And so it really is about listening. Which ones relate to me? Which ones are relevant to me? Where are there some areas where I can learn and get a little bit better and maybe do some of the necessary work that is needed on my journey of anti-racism? So think about that yourself, staring into the mirror. Which of these are affecting me? Which of these do I need to work on? That is the question you need to be asking as we go through these. So number 11, interrogate your words. And this covers a whole lot of things. I'm going to give you some examples, but just take the essence of interrogate your words and be mindful of some of the words, some of the language that you may use when speaking to people of color, when speaking about people of color. And the first one I'm hoping nobody is guilty of, but I know when I was growing up, this was a thing. And I remember when I started to write a bit of a book in 2020, I had just seen an example of it. So I don't think it is as dead and buried as we hope it is. But this idea of referring to maybe a gardener as boy, and maybe the gardener who works for you is 54 years old or something like that, or the lady who cleans your house, referring to her as the girl. Those are very offensive terms, and it's often quite easy just to switch it around and think if somebody was calling your mom girl or referring to your dad as boy, just how easily we can see how wrong it is to do that. And so those are kind of the low-hanging fruit examples. Another one that's a little bit tricky is the term maid, which I've stopped using. And words can be difficult. They can be challenging. When we start interrogating words, you might feel like, oh, what words can I say? And with these whole conversations on wokeness and being politically correct and all the kind of flack it gets, people will often go to that space. Oh, I can't say anything anymore. And it's not about that. It's about how can I not offend? How can I not actively hurt people with the words that I use? And if there are easy ways to change up a word or a phrase or something you used to say so that it doesn't hurt people, then that feels like something that should be really easy. It's certainly been really easy for me to do. And the word maid, somebody challenged me on it once because it's short for maid servant, and we don't have servants anymore. We don't have slaves anymore. And so I typically will talk about the cleaner or the woman who cleans my house. It's a very simple change to make. And so again, like these are not rocket science things. There are bigger ones and there are smaller ones. But every time I come across something that's an easy switch to make, and I'm not hurting people when I say something, or not treating people as less than, or not dehumanizing people, then it feels like this is something we can do. This next one is really tricky, and again, it will depend, because you might find black people that will say, no, that's fine, and others that say it isn't. But the one term that I've really moved far away from is this idea of talking about non-white when we are referring to black or colored or Indian people in South Africa. And so I prefer the term people of color, and I've once had pushback against that. And so then I started, even when I'm talking about people, speaking about black, colored, and Indian people. Another term that is useful in activist spaces, but other people might not know what it means, is Biko Black. And Biko Black, as far as I understand it, refers to basically people who aren't white. So the broader category of black people that includes colored and Indian people. And the reason non-white is so problematic is that it is identifying somebody as something they're not. So you're non-white. And what that does is it says that white is the normal thing, white is the right thing, white is the good thing, and you are not that. You are less than. And so calling somebody non-white, I've heard many people are offended by that, and I think it's offensive because you are referring to somebody as something they're not. So rather call them a black person or a colored person or an Indian person, or as I've said, most of the time, people of color seems to be okay with people. These things get worked out in conversation with people, and we'll get back to that a little bit later. But you might find that blanket rules don't help. And as you are in relationship with people, well, what do you want me to call you? How do you want me to refer to you if it's relevant? Sometimes race is relevant. Oftentimes it's not in terms of bringing it up or whatever. Another phrase that is unhelpful is when people talk about those people and they are talking about black people or, again, colored or Indian people, and you're referring to them in the stereotypical, like grouping them all together. Oh, those people. It's usually in a derogatory, negative way. And again, it's just something that we can move away from. And then a really more subtle, more nuanced one is to use the term black people rather than the blacks, the coloreds, the Indians. And again, it's often how the words are said in phrases that lets you know that's not okay. And again, you might find some people think it's okay, some people don't. But if I hear people talking about the blacks, it seems to be this dehumanized, kind of stereotypical, all rolled into one thing. Whereas if you talk about black people, there's a sense of humanity in there. And so just interrogate your words. The words we use can help build bridges. And that's why I think it is so important that we do the work of saying, oh, this word isn't so helpful, or this word makes someone feel bad. I can easily use a different word. Sure. One of the words that I want to use just to look at, there are people that are not from South Africa that are listening to this. And so the word colored is a very interesting word because in America, at least, maybe England as well, I know it's a very offensive term. Whereas in South Africa, colored refers to a section of people. We have black people, we have colored people, we have Indian people. And so in America, I learned very quickly that to call black people there or African Americans to refer to them as colored is super insulting, super offensive. Don't do it. In South Africa, because it refers to a people group and it refers to kind of culture, community, it is something that we use often. However, what I've noticed, I've got some colored friends who are absolutely fine with the term. They call themselves colored. They will invite me to call them colored. And then I've got some other friends that would identify or would be bracketed as colored people who hate the term because they see it as offensive. They see it as linked to kind of apartheid. And so within the same group, you've got different people, some that think it's okay. And actually they identify as colored and they want their colored identity. And so if you don't call them colored, you're offending them. And other people, even colored people, who will rather call themselves black, and it's that idea of the Biko black that I mentioned, or will talk about themselves as brown people. And so again, this is where you figure these things out in relationship. When you have a relationship with people, you can understand how would they like to be called, referred as. And this goes in terms of even titles that people want. Does somebody want to be called Doctor or Mr. or Mrs. or Miss or whatever it is? Like, we figure those things out in relationship with people. And this comment by Ntabi and Lala sums this up brilliantly. There is so much that must be unlearned in order to learn anew in South Africa. The least white people can begin with is to acknowledge us as fellow human beings. Next is to see individuals, not just as a bunch of homogeneous species. Then it can be a little easier to want to know how and what each person rather prefers. So that whole thing of just like understand people are human. We as white people that have grown up in the sea of apartheid, and that's referring to the older ones of us, but even those of us today, there's still so many systems and structures and places where race is still an issue. There's a lot of unlearning that we need to do. And so this point is just all about interrogating your words in conversation with people, in research, try and find out which words are okay, which words aren't, and then change them. It really doesn't have to be such a big deal. Point number 12 is very similar. And I've said, learn about the history of words and meanings, nuance and context to increase sensitivity. One of the first tips we had was all about listening. And part of that listening is about reading. I've spoken to you about reading different voice or having different voices inform you in terms of who you read and who you listen to. And again, as you start reading different people, and especially as you start doing the work that needs to be done, reading books on race, reading books on South African history, a lot of this stuff will start to make sense just naturally through those pathways. One of the clearest examples of this is this idea of calling a kid a monkey. And so often when parents or people see a little kid playing around, they will call it the child, they will call it a monkey or refer to it as a monkey, meaning it in a really positive way. It has monkey-like tendencies, it's just playing around, it's impish, it's fun, it's having a jaw. Often the intention is not negative. And however, because black people, for example, were referred to as monkeys in the history, and monkey was used as a dehumanizing term, it was used to insult and to bring down and to objectify and all those kind of things. We cannot call black kids monkeys, not even as a joke, not even if we mean it endearingly. And so as a white person, I've learned for myself that I can't do that. A black parent can refer to their kid as a monkey, very different thing. And so it's not actually just about the term, but it's about understanding the history of the word and the meaning and the nuance of the context. Why is it bad for a white person to refer to a person of color as a monkey? Because that was used in all seriousness. Even on the internet today, you can find people that are using it in a derogatory, mean, hurtful, racist way. And so what I need to do is I need to just blanketly stop doing it. And part of this is playing around with this question of intention versus effect. But what if I don't mean it in a bad way? My intention is good, but the effect of it, because I might be in relationship with a black family, or I've got a friend of mine has adopted 2 black children. And so in the context of me and him, it might seem like it's okay, but we might be out at the park and I refer to one of his kids as a monkey. Somebody who doesn't know me might be a black person who hears it and they get deeply offended. Or it could even be a white person who hears it and goes, oh, it's okay to call black kids monkeys. And so again, like instead of kind of having the gray area of where is it okay and where is it not, for me, it's an easy decision to go, okay, for me to call people of color monkeys or to call the kids monkeys is not okay. For other parents, and again, this is something that people have to figure out for themselves, but it's an easy one. And we've seen things happen in the sporting world and in other places, newspaper headlines where people have referred to people in that way, and it has been taken offensively because historically it is an offensive thing. And then when we talk about the history of words and meanings, this extends also to actions. So another simple example, and remember, I'm giving you tips and hints that you can go and take to other situations and figure out kind of your own examples and where these play out. But a huge example is blackface. And so the idea of a white person painting their face black, often in a play or drama, so that they can play a black person. Maybe 20, 25 years ago, we didn't see that as such a bad thing. It's only kind of in recent history where the majority of people go, oh, okay, that's really not okay. It's not allowed. And again, it goes back to a time when it was used to mock black people, when it was used to mock slaves, when it was used in dramas to belittle and dehumanize. And so because it has that historical link and connection, it's okay for me as a white person to go, I'm never going to do blackface. Even in a party, even in fancy dress, even for improv, it's not okay. And so I need to start learning about the history of words and meanings, nuance and context to increase sensitivity. It's about being sensitive to people. It's about treating people well. So these I hope you see how easy these things are to get. This next one might be a bit trickier. Be aware of your loud white space in the room. And if you're feeling defensive, if you're feeling like hairs on your body are starting to go up, if you're feeling like you're reaching towards that stop button, just lean into this. Be aware of your loud white space in the room. And a bonus tip for white men, of which I am one, be aware of your loud white male space in the room. And so we touch on a thing called intersectionality, where race is a big issue, but so is sexism or patriarchy. And sometimes those things intersect. And so sometimes both things are true at the same time. And so I'm a white male, and I acknowledge that this stuff can be hard because I'm used to having my voice heard. And I'm not as used to stepping out of the way to create space for other lesser heard voices, or at least that's kind of my history in the space over the last 10, 15 years as I've been working at this stuff, I found it a little bit easier to step out of the way to create space for other lesser heard voices. But that is kind of where I came from. As a white person in South Africa, as a white man, my voice was the most invited. It was the most given room to. It was the most taken seriously. And just a little kind of spoiler alert on this. And I think this is really important. We cannot give people a voice. Everyone has a voice. Some are just silenced or ignored or spoken over. So we talk about giving someone a voice. No. But what we can do is we can help make space for other people's voices to be heard. And so what this might mean sometimes if you're in a group setting and it's a mixed group of people, and this works for men in a setting with men and women, and it works for white people in a setting with people of color, hold back from speaking. It can mean championing other voices. Hey, what do you think about this thing? Well, I'd love to hear your voice. And it can be about interrupting interrupters. And so if a woman is speaking and a man interrupts her, I can be an ally to women by saying, hey, we haven't finished hearing from Jill. Please let her speak. So hold back from speaking, champion other voices, interrupt interrupters. Be aware of your loud white space in the room. And then do what you can to quieten it and start to listen and learn from the extensive wealth that others bring to the conversation. Again, this goes back to the book thing. If I only ever hear the voices of white males, then I'm going to be missing out a lot. I'm going to be missing out on a female perspective. I'm going to be missing out on a black perspective, colored Indian perspective. If I only hear young people, I'm going to miss the voices of the elderly and the experience that they bring. So how can I listen better and learn from the wealth that others are bringing to the conversation? I'm going to jump straight into point number 14 because it's kind of connected to this one. So this was be aware of your loud white space in the room. 14 is stop centering whiteness. Don't center yourself or white people in the conversation. And an example shared by my friend Tony, he said this, and this was a while ago, but he said, I encountered a white gentleman on Facebook recently who felt aggrieved that I said that black people were the victims of apartheid. He then lambasted me because he didn't want to be excluded as a victim because he could not travel abroad during that time and expand his mind. And I mean, this is such a ridiculous example anyway, right? The one, like black people get apartheid and the white person, oh, I didn't get to travel abroad. Like there's no comparison, but yet that white person felt it was necessary to center themselves in the story. So this big story of apartheid and how black, colored and Indian people had been treated and the pain and the dehumanization and the legacy of all of that. And he wanted his voice to be heard about missing out on going abroad. And then Tony continued, this nonsense came out in a convention about a white lady feeling excluded at a business conference about empowerment. She felt that she was excluded as she was white and the focus was on black empowerment. This enraged everybody. Anyway, just a thought about not making ourselves at the center of everything, even as a victim of apartheid. Tony summed it up by saying, maybe along the lines of making everything about yourself as a white English speaker, about being in a public space and being insulted that the discussion is not about you or people like you, but is actually excluding you for good reason. It's about white people not allowing space for others to express pain or emotion without the crying about having our own pain and emotion. And so not making it all about me, me, me. We are used to being the center of attention, and much of this is the result of whiteness having been raised and placed on a pedestal and been made the benchmark of what to aspire to. In colonial times, in apartheid times, in slavery times, white people were lifted up, seen as better as they were given the mics, they had the authority. And so that is one of the things that we've got to unlearn as we start to share space with people. And I want to share a little bit of a story from a course that I did called LUT, Leadership in Urban Theology, a couple of years ago. I went into this room and the group, I think there were about 13 of us, and there were about 5 black people and 2 colored people, and I think 3 women. And I made a decision early on. I can't remember what prompted it, but it was amazing. It might have been something I was reading or something, but I made a decision. I'm not going to speak in that room, and a lot of it was group discussion, conversation, until a woman and a person of color has spoken. I think white people made up about half of the group. And so if 3 white people spoke, or even if just one white person spoke, I wasn't going to speak until a woman or a person of color had spoken. And kind of did that as a thought experiment over the year, and also just to see and experience what it would be like. And I found it truly fascinating. I learned so much. One of the things I learned is that I have this idea that what I want to say is so important. And so when other people are making points, but they're not saying the thing I want to say, it's like, oh, my point feels so important. But when I could get to the point of just going, okay, this point doesn't need to be heard. Like it's okay. Let's leave that point. What does this woman have to say? What does this black person have to say? And then listening to the things that wouldn't have been said if I had been so forceful with making sure that my thing got said. And just having my mind blown and coming to the conclusion, oh, my thing actually didn't need to be said. And I'm not talking about white people not having voices or being excluded completely or anything like that, but I'm just saying because we have spoken so much of the time and because we tend to speak and take up space, because men tend to take up space, all that kind of thing, like what will happen if we start to let different voices speak? We step away from the mic, we hand the mic to the people whose voices are often not listened to. And I really grew so much through that experience. And I would suggest that one of the reasons why black, colored, and Indian people may be slow to speak in these kind of spaces is because they've become so used to being ignored, interrupted, or made to feel inferior when they have tried to speak. White voices really come with a lot of power, and so we will do well to focus on quietening ours down, even if it leaves spaces that feel uncomfortable for us. Someone will eventually speak, and it does not have to be me. So this is such a good point, or these combinations of points about being aware of your loud white space in the room and stop centering whiteness. And I think one of the places we get to see it, if you're ever in a group meeting where there's a diverse audience and somebody gives a talk and then they hand the microphone around for people to ask questions. I've done this so many times, and typically the first 3 people to ask questions are going to be old white men. And so how do we interrupt that? How do we invite and create space for others to speak? Point number 15, do some good work in understanding what white privilege means and how it relates to you. And I've spoken about privilege in a number of my podcast episodes. When you hear the term white privilege, a lot of people, that kind of shuts down the conversation right away. And so listen to what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that you had lots of money or things or even adequate food to eat while growing up, or that life has not been hard. You may have, but that is not the definition. I'm also not saying that you didn't work really hard to get everything you currently have. You may have, but that is also not the definition. When I talk about white privilege, what I am saying is that there is the greatest likelihood that the color of your skin had nothing to do with any hardship or struggle that you may have had growing up if you are a white person, and especially if you are a white person in South Africa. You may have had hard times, you may have been poor, you may have had to work 3 jobs, but none of that was because you were white. However, if you were a black person, if you were an Indian person, if you're a colored person, there's a likelihood that you didn't have things because you were black, Indian, and colored. And so the concept of white privilege, as I understand it, is the acknowledgement that certain benefits, opportunities, or access has been granted to me purely on the basis of being white. Not because I deserved it, not because I earned it, but certain things have been given to me. And listen again, benefits, opportunities, access, purely on the basis of being white. And when I speak about white privilege, this isn't about feeling guilty. I don't believe in white guilt. I do believe in white responsibility. And so the 3 words that I use with white privilege are recognize that I have it. I get certain advantages just because I'm white. It might be trust. I walk into a shopping center and I get a lot more trust than a black person who might be followed around by security. It might be people taking me seriously. It might be people thinking I have authority to be in a certain space or walking around in a certain neighborhood. It might be people thinking I belong. So the first thing I can do is recognize that I have it. The second thing is acknowledge it, say it. I've got white privilege. That's an easy enough thing to say. And then lastly, leverage. How can I use the fact that I have some unearned benefits to help those who don't have those same benefits? My friend Sean shared this quote, which I think says what I've been trying to say in a different way, and I hope you'll find it helpful, by a guy called Eric Rayton. Those who experience privilege did not choose to be born into the class that society advantages through systemic forces, and they did not create these forces that advantage them. Furthermore, they have limited power as individuals to change society, and so are unlikely on their own to be able to divest themselves of their privilege. This means that having privilege is not something anyone should feel guilty about. You can't help it. While there are some advantages you can cast off, you can't remove the social forces that give people in your class a systemic advantage. So acknowledging privilege is not about feeling guilty or about casting blame. It is first and foremost about recognizing an inequality in the social structure, and then about making a commitment to working for change as one's life situation allows, and recognizing that having a particular kind of privilege may allow one to work for greater equity. Work for a society in which one no longer experiences this privilege in ways that those who lack this privilege can't. And so I think that's really helpful. I think that sums it up. It's not something to feel bad about. It's about noticing you've got it and what can I do to change things around me so that everyone benefits from it. Point number 16, don't whitesplain. And I don't know if that's an actual word or if it's something I made up, but I think most of us know the term mansplaining, which is the term that describes when a man explains something typically to a woman in a manner that is regarded as condescending or patronizing. Or it can happen in a meeting where a woman has answered a question and then a man will answer the same question and perhaps give the same answer in slightly different words and receive all the praise as if he had answered the question. It tends to indirectly suggest quite loudly that the person you're talking for is ignorant or not capable of communicating the necessary information. It's very demeaning and exhausting for the person on the receiving end. And so if you take that idea of mansplaining and just add in the word whitesplaining, exactly the same thing. And my friend Hani put it this way: notice when you start to explain to people of color how the world works or what's actually happening. And she says there's a tone white people often take when they believe they're talking to an ignorant person, which is usually someone of color. And so don't whitesplain. And I think this really goes hand in hand with that thing of listening. If we truly listening to understand the experiences that people of color have living in our country or living in our world, then I think we'll be less tempted to whitesplain. And when we've heard somebody talk about their pain, to sit and go, oh, it's not like that, or oh, I've experienced that as well, and dismiss their story is what whitesplaining is about. We need to stop that, even if we feel like we have experienced a similar thing. Have we experienced that thing purely because of our skin color? And if we haven't, then just sit and listen and learn. Number 17, understand the difference between being white and whiteness. So being white is what I look like. It is my heritage in a sense. Whiteness, when we talk about that, we're talking about an ideology in South Africa and actually many places across the world, where being white or being associated with cultural things linked to being white was elevated above other things. So whiteness brought about apartheid, it brought about slavery, colonialism, all of those kind of things. Frankenberg says this: it shapes how white people view themselves and others and places white people in a place of structural advantage where white cultural norms and practices go unnamed and unquestioned. So it's kind of linked to that thing of when we spoke about not calling black people non-white. It makes white the center, white is the normal, white is the thing we accept, and everything else is somehow less than. And so that's what whiteness does. It puts itself in the top, and anything else is kind of a lesser version of that. As white people, typically whiteness is never something we think about, because we never had to think about the color of our skin when we go out for a meal or when we apply for a job or a bank loan, or when we walk through a rich neighborhood or are looking for a house to rent, or when being pulled over by the police. We don't have to think about our skin in those situations unless we are aware of how things are, and we can be aware that being white is a positive in those spaces. But black, colored, and Indian people have been made to think about the color of their skin every single day. And this is something we really need to get. And I kind of have it in my head, but I still think I don't and probably can't fully understand what it must be like to have to think of the color of your skin every day when you're going to a certain place, when you see somebody treating you a certain way, when you are walking in a certain area, when you're applying for a job, going to a restaurant. If you have to think about your color because you know it could have some effect on how you are received or seen, that must be super exhausting, and we really need to get that a lot more. And an interesting experiment might be to talk to some of your black, colored, and Indian friends and work colleagues and ask them, when last were you made aware about the color of your skin? And then think to yourself, when last were you made aware about the color of your skin? Because generally as white people, we don't think about being white because the world has been created for us largely. Point number 18, everyone being treated the same is not justice. And there's that well-known quote, I couldn't find out who said it, but it's when you're accustomed to privilege, equality can feel like oppression. And so to use a really ridiculous analogy, imagine kind of apartheid years as a soccer game, but the soccer game was being played on a field that was 45 degrees tilted to the right. And white people were at the top half, black people were at the bottom half. And so at halftime, white people are winning 25-0 because gravity's on their side. It's so impossible for the black team going uphill to score goals. And so at halftime, it's 25-0 to white people. And then 1994 happens, and the ref says, okay, we realize it's been unfair. And so the rest of the game is going to be played on a flat surface. That sounds like justice, right? Everyone gets the same thing. However, we're going to go from 25-0 to white people. Is that fair? No. It's a huge, huge disadvantage. And so in 94, when we cancelled all the laws that affected black, colored, and Indian people or started working towards cancelling them, white people were largely left 25-0 up because we had the land and we had the money and we had the jobs and we had the CEO positions and we had all the things that had been gathered and inherited and passed on and kept at that time. And so just by leveling the playing field without undoing some of those things, without giving land back, without moving where spatial apartheid has put black people furthest away, colored people in the middle, white people greatest access, all those kind of things, then that isn't justice. Another story of a bicycle. So somebody steals a bicycle and then 20 years later they give the bike back. Okay, justice, but it's not justice because during that time when the person had their bicycle stolen, they might have suffered a loss of work because they couldn't get to work. They couldn't do a newspaper route. They might have gone through a lot more shoes because they're walking around the whole time. And so the person who stole the bike was saving on clothing money. They would have used up a lot more energy. They would have lost a lot more time because they would have taken a lot more time to get to places. And so 20 years later, just giving the bike back is not leveling the playing field. There needs to be some reparation and some, like, what did you lose in those 20 years when things were against you? How can we balance that out? And so when we talk about BEE, Black Economic Empowerment, a very contentious issue. And a lot of people, like especially kind of this year in social media, people have gone, oh, now there's all these laws that are against white people. As if in any way things are comparative, as if in any way we are facing a situation similar to apartheid. It's actually disgusting that people use that as an argument. But the point of BEE, and I know it has not been used in the best possible ways. There's some places where it's worked really well. A lot of places it hasn't been working well. But the point behind it was to say these positions had been reserved for white people for so long. And so the same with sports quotas. The teams were only reserved for white people. Now we're going to put things in place to help black people, colored people, Indian people to be in the teams, to be in those spaces, to move up in companies, to get employment, to get education and all those kind of things. And so everyone being treated the same is not justice unless we are working at unlearning, undoing, repairing the things that have been broken. And you've probably seen this picture analogy of three people outside a sports field. There's a really tall guy, a medium tall guy, and a really short guy. And they're standing behind this fence and they can't see. And then each one of them gets a box. And once they're all standing on the boxes, the really tall guy can see, the medium guy can just about see, but the short guy still can't see. So it's justice because they were each given a box. But actually, they don't need justice. They need equity. They need something that will make things equal. And so the shortest guy actually needs 3 boxes, the medium guy needs 2 boxes, and the tall guy only needs 1 box. And then suddenly, they all get an equal view of the game. And so those are some of the questions we're going to have to look at. And if you're looking at an analogy like that, then you have to question, why is there a fence in the first place? What can we do to just give people access to the game regardless? And so we've got to start doing critical thinking and asking better questions because everyone being treated the same is not justice. Point number 19, understand the term the better black, colored, or Indian and how to avoid promoting that. And this is in inverted commas, the better black. And this idea builds on some earlier work that we did in terms of being aware of the words we use and what are the implications in the world around us. And so I had a friend who was at a church that from the outside looked very diverse and multiracial. And she was part of a small group. And she actually introduced me to that term, where she was the only black person that once a week would meet with 8 or 9 white people. And she said, like, in those situations, she had to intentionally work at becoming what she called the better black. And so she had to speak English in a certain way. She had to have a certain accent. She had to listen or pretend to listen to certain types of music. And they were basically just things she could do or things she could show up as that were acceptable, whereas other things weren't acceptable. So it wasn't you are accepted for who you are, but the sense, and it was very subtle and very undertoned, that she had to present herself as this better black. this person who was not like all those other blacks, in a sense, so that she would be accepted. And it's evidenced when we say things like, you speak English so well, or when we're more blatant and actually say, you speak English well for a black person, where in both cases the insinuation is that most black people speak English badly, but you are a better black than them. And that starts to be like when we talk about those people. Remember that I said earlier, don't do that. And you're better than those people because you sound more like us. Whereas in most situations, the black person is probably speaking their second or third language anyway, and just the way that they are communicating is really amazing. And you try speaking to them in their language and see how bad it would be. But it gets even worse when white people actually speak the words, I don't even think of you as a black. And that has happened. And I've had friends who have shared that for me. I don't even think of you as a black. How dehumanizing and offensive a statement like that is. Have you ever said it or thought it? This has to stop. And it's about creating spaces where we are inviting people to the table, but we're inviting them in as themselves, and we're inviting them in with curiosity to learn who they are, not expecting them to show up in a certain way so that they fit in with us. And lastly, for this section, don't place conditions on the acceptance of people who don't look like you. And that, again, that is really connected to the point before. So it's a two-part point. I will engage with you if you talk more like me. I will be your friend if you adhere to my definition and understanding of time. I will accept you if your hair looks more like mine. I will hang out with you if you speak more softly, if you dance more reservedly, if you show less emotion, if you make less of a political fuss about things, and more. Don't place conditions on the acceptance of people who don't look like you. So we touched on that when speaking about this idea of the better black-colored Indian. But the phrase conditional acceptance was something that came out in a meeting I was at. And so I just want to kind of push a little further into that. And this also takes us back to the concept of colorblindness, which we dealt with in the first 10 tips. And so remember, the call is to be overtly color aware, and then color and culture embracing and celebratory. Show me who you really are, and let me embrace that and learn from that and experience that. Let me see the real you, and let me be okay with that. And then the work has to be in me and not in you. You're not working to be acceptable to me. I'm doing the work to make sure that I'm curious and interested and loving. And this may require daily dismantling and unlearning from some of us, and maybe all of us to different extents, a redefinition of what we view as normal or right or the standard. Stop placing conditions on the people around you and step into the realization and lived experience of knowing that I am because you are. And that's that whole concept of Ubuntu. So there you have it, the next 10 steps, and as mentioned, they may not all apply to you. But also you might find it super overwhelming. You've got 20 tips now. That's a whole lot of stuff. How do I get all this stuff going? As with eating an elephant, just do it one bite at a time. Go back and start with point number 1. Start to read and start to listen and start to watch, and then start to have conversations, and maybe listen to this a few more times. Just listen to it and let it kind of flow over you, and start to try and understand what it's about, and start to listen to the words that you use, and start to sit in meetings and view how people of color are treated, or are their voices heard, and start to slowly move into those places of both unlearning and then learning new things. All of these points, what can I do when it comes to race or anti-racism, are really asking the question, how can I treat people better? How can I treat everyone the same? How can I be a better person, especially to those around me who have suffered so much because of the history of our country and because of the general state of the world when it comes to race? Thank you for listening. Once again, if you have other people you know will benefit from this, please get them to listen to it with you. Start with The Amazing Race. Listen to the first 10 tips and the second 10 tips, and there are going to be 10 more on the way. I hope you found this helpful and useful, and I hope you will let me know which of the points stood out for you. Send me a message. Let me know which was really helpful. Let me know as you start doing these things. Let me know how it goes. I want to hear stories of how hearing and starting to do these things is changing the way you live.